Now we're coming towards the end of our program here today, and we're going to take a look at the Volkswagen scandal. Now, every other day, it seems, there is a fallout event linked to that scandal. Lawsuits announced or threatened in several countries. More VW top staff suspended. Its quality control chief, Frank Tuch, was the fifth high-ranking executive to be sanctioned. It all blew up, as we will all remember, in September, when US environmental agencies revealed that the German carmaker had fitted its diesel cars with software capable of tricking emissions tests. Chief Executive Martin Winterkorn had to resign. His replacement, Matthias Müller, hinted at job losses at Volkswagen, Europe's largest car maker, and that group also includes Skoda, Seat and Audi. More crucially, as far as prosecution and damages are concerned, not to mention its image, it's been claimed that Volkswagen produced several versions of that software to suit different diesel engines, and thereby making them comply with different standards throughout the world. Now, VW hasn't confirmed nor denied that latest accusation, but if true, it would mean that this was a sustained effort with many tiers of staff involved and not just the doing of a few engineers. Now, to discuss what is probably the biggest scandal hitting the automotive industry, with me here in studio is Christopher Mesnooh, who's a partner at law with the firm Field Fisher Waterhouse, and you specialise in corporate and technology law. Now, it appears that environmental regulators throughout the world were fooled for a long time. How was this possible?
Well, the whole purpose of these tests was to basically prove that the vehicles in question were conforming with environmental regulations. So it was basically fraud with respect to inserting the software into the different vehicles. Mm-hmm. And fraud can be very convincing and can fool a lot of people for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, are we likely to see a tightening up of the rules and standards here, and more importantly, of the checking procedures?
I think we'll see that, but I think more interestingly than that, we're going to actually see the whole question of diesel fuel as an alternative to regular automobile fuel, particularly in Europe. Mm-hmm. This has brought to the attention of a lot of people that diesel vehicles are not only not necessarily less polluting, mm-hmm. but in fact, and we've seen this recently in Paris, they can actually produce a great quantity of emissions. Mm-hmm. So I think the ultimate result of this scandal is going to be diesel itself is going to be called into question, particularly in Europe.
Now, we are talking of 11 million vehicles that will need to be recalled by Volkswagen, though Volkswagen haven't explained what will actually happen next after that. Once these are recalled, what are they going to actually do? But the company has said that it has set aside, this is more in your domain, what you've been following, is 6.5 billion euros in provisions in the third quarter of this year. But the new chief, Matthias Müller, has acknowledged that this only covers estimated cost of fixing the vehicles. Now, do you think this is realistic as a figure?
The estimates for the United States alone, mm-hmm. in terms of legal action, recalls, repairs, possibly repurchasing vehicles from people who feel that they've been harmed, mm-hmm. is already in several tens of billions of dollars, and that's simply for the United States. And I'd remind our listeners that in the United States, we're only talking about 500,000 vehicles. The bulk of the vehicles are here in Europe.
Yes.
So if we have 10 million in Europe, and even if the legal system in Europe is less expensive than what it is in the United States, these 6 or 7 billion euros that they've set aside is most likely to be significantly undervalued.
Undervalued. I mean, there have been some people, picking figures out of the ether, but I'm sure with a bit of reflection, but saying it could, if it goes up to something like 60 or 80 billion, that will be the end of Volkswagen, will it?
That would certainly
be the nail in the coffin.
That would let's not go that far, but it would certainly put a significant crimp in their style. Let's not forget, not only are there all the consumer actions, but there are the governmental actions, and particularly in the United States. And so these are also likely to cost, and we've seen this recently in banking scandals, several billions of dollars. So the $6.5 billion is nowhere near what this is going to cost.
And of course, with what happened in 2007 and 2008 with banking scandals, with Lehman and all that, the American judicial system is going to come down with a hammer, I would say. Is that a correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And again, ironically, on the base of a far smaller number of vehicles than what's happened in Europe, but the American legal system, and I know of what I speak, the American legal system is particularly interested in punishing wrongdoers. And this is a pretty clear-cut example of wrongdoing at an extremely high level.
And now that, of course, is all about recalling the cars. Now, let's actually look at the lawsuits as well. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there was the Norwegian ship owner, IM Skaugen, have disclosed that they are seeking themselves $50 million in compensation. This is just compensation from marine units of Volkswagen for rigging performance tests of ship engines that were produced over 10 years ago. Now, this means that the company had to spend more on fuel. So, in your opinion, what figures can Volkswagen start setting aside just to meet legal costs and compensation claims?
Well, there are going to be several significant legal costs involved. There are going to be the actual lawsuits brought by consumers, either on an individual basis or in the form of a class action. And class actions have already commenced in the United States as well as in Europe. There are, as I said before, the governmental sanctions which are going to be imposed, which in the United States are most likely going to exceed several $1 billion. If this turns out to be the fraud that it appears to be, insurance will not cover fraudulent activity, which means that whatever insurance Volkswagen has, and of course it has a great deal of insurance, it's not going to cover this kind of activity. So whatever this winds up costing, and you're correct, it's going to be in the tens of billions of dollars or euros, they're going to have to pay for this out of their own pockets. It's certainly, financially speaking, a tremendous hit.
Now, we've looked in just at one individual case there about the Norwegian ship owner, but let's have a look at the actual individual consumers. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there probably rubbing their hands going, oh, I bought this car 8 years ago, and I was led down to believe that this was environmentally friendly. So we might have kind of environmental versions of ambulance chasers who are saying, well, maybe I'll get a brand new one with everything fitted up. What are people actually individually looking for? Are they really going to put their hand up and say, I really care that much about the environment that I want to press a lawsuit against Volkswagen as an individual?
Well, it's interesting because at least in the United States, these cars, the diesel cars, cost significantly more than regular automobile
because
fuel.
Of import duty?
In part, and because they're seen as environmentally more friendly. And so Volkswagen and other manufacturers are actually able to obtain a premium when people purchase cars. So basically consumers, and I'll speak about the United States, consumers say, on the one hand, we paid a great deal more to buy these supposedly green cars, anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per vehicle. And on the other hand, the resale value is going to be significantly less because however this shakes out, these cars will not be viewed favorably in the secondhand market. So I've lost money going into this, and I'm going to lose money coming out of it. And in America, where people are not shy about speaking about money, they will certainly try to obtain indemnification for both ends of the stick.
They're looking for compensation in a failed investment in that.
Absolutely.
Essentially, yeah.
And again, contractual breach, fraud, misrepresentation, you throw all that into the pot, people are going to be very enthusiastic about claiming large amounts of money.
Now, we've touched on this, that the highest bills for VW, even though it's only got a much smaller fleet of VW cars actually in circulation in the US, but the highest bills will be coming from America. How can you give us a little angle on how US and European procedures in this affair will actually differ? I mean, I think people are saying that the EU approach will be a little softer because they'll be kind of, well, shooting themselves in the foot. It's the largest manufacturer in Europe, so... Yeah,
I mean, the American system tends to be punitive from a legal perspective in the way that European legal systems are not. On top of it, you're absolutely correct. There's not only Volkswagen, but the French automobile manufacturers also produce a large number of diesel vehicles. So, I said before that diesel may very well wind up being seen as a not good alternative to fuel. On the other hand, people can't go too quickly. We can't disrupt the markets throughout the European Union too quickly. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs involved with all of these automobile manufacturers. So the legal system here will proceed roughly the same way. They're going to do scientific analyses. They're going to ask for testimony. They're going to organize class actions, which we've seen already in France and in other European countries. There have already been dawn raids in Volkswagen's offices in several European countries.
But there was a few, I think, in Paris only a few days ago.
There are a few in this country a few days ago, absolutely. So, roughly the systems will go in parallel, and what happens in America will be looked at very closely here in Europe. At the end of the day, probably on a per capita basis, this affair will cost them more in the United States than it will in Europe.
And just about those raids, I mean, are they going in to look for forensic evidence of fraud? Like, I mean, what are they actually looking for, in your opinion? Are they looking for documents, databases?
They're looking for forensic evidence to demonstrate that the company as an institution, or at least some piece of it, knew what they were doing on this side of the Atlantic. And another piece which is going to be very important in this matter is to look for individual responsibility. Who at Volkswagen in Germany, but also in France, UK, and Italy, and elsewhere, knew about this. So there will be an attempt to assign some individual responsibility as well as collective responsibility on Volkswagen itself.
Now, we're running out of time, but we have time for just one last question. I mean, there are suspicions that other car manufacturers may also have rigged their emission tests. Is there any evidence so far?
There's not been any direct evidence so far. There's certainly this cloud of suspicion hanging over all diesel manufacturers, and I should say anything relating to environmental testing. There's an expression, greenwashing, making your company look more environmentally friendly than it really is. I think this is going to cast a pall across any company that claims to be environmentally friendly.
And of course, this greenwashing is pretty much, it's everywhere. Everyone's doing it. I mean, it's almost you're stupid not to.
Well, as a lawyer, I'm not prepared to concede that everybody's doing it, but there will certainly be suspicion cast very wide and very far.
And it's, I mean, also on that, there's people like, when you actually look into the amount that people who are saying that they're environmentally friendly say, oh, well, this amount of money will be going to planting trees in the Amazon rainforest, and then you realize it's only like 1 cent. So,
yes.
I mean,
how many of us really follow up?
Exactly.
It's impossible to follow up.
Christopher Mesnooh, thank you very much for being on the program today.
My pleasure.
And